Do beat sheets work?
I think having an outline is an excellent idea. I do know writers who don't need them. I think they need something, and these are going to be writers, I speak of writers I've worked with, so they tend to already be devotees of using the nutshell technique, and that might be all they do. They won't do a beat sheet, they'll just do a nutshell technique form, and as long as they are true to that, they'll have it and it's nice and solid, and maybe they'll work with me one-on-one to make sure their nutshell is solid. They'll tack it up on their bulletin board, and then they'll write from that, and they don't do any other beat sheet or outlining. I think most writers need a beat sheet or outline. They need more detail than that, but it varies. As long as you have a solid structure, you don't necessarily need more than this. You know, the idea, this isn't drawn to scale, but you'll see that most of my structure things are in Act 1 and Act 3, and the only thing that's in Act 2 is this one element here. And Act 2 is actually twice as long. So I don't have a bunch of structure requirements. I don't have required beats in your Act 2, even though Act 2 is twice as long. I strongly believe that if you properly structure things in Act 1 and you properly structure things in Act 3, it does all the heavy lifting of supporting your Act 2, even though your Act 2 is twice as long as you maintain conflict. So I know lots of writers who hate beat sheets and they ask me, can I really throw it out? And I was like, you absolutely can. If you don't like doing a beat sheet, you don't find that helpful, you can. As long as you find a nice solid structure and you stay true to it, this should be enough to guide you as long as you have conflict. I do think most writers need more detail. And so but it's up to the writer a little bit. So more detail. I don't think it's a good idea to do a super detailed one because you want to allow a certain amount of discovery on the page. I mean, that's why I like having the looser structure of the nutshell to begin with. We have a couple things you got to hit. If you shift from them, then you're screwing up your story. But if you stay solid to these elements, that might be all you need, and you can just write and live on the page as long as you hit those couple of moments. Or perhaps you need a little bit more structure, a little bit of an outline or a beat sheet. But I don't recommend doing super detailed ones. There's a thing I call beat sheet fatigue, where people just spend too much time on that, particularly if you're getting feedback, if you're sharing your nutshell or your beat sheet or your outline with your writing group or people like that. You know, maybe get feedback on maybe like an 8-page one. If it's any longer than that, it's getting into so much detail that we'd rather read the script at that point. A beat sheet ultimately is for your benefit anyway. So it's whatever you need. If you need a little more structure than just this, and like I said, I think most people need a little bit more, I think it's a pretty good idea to have a loose guide of, this happens, I think this happens, then this happens, and this happens, but kind of loose so that you can discover somewhat on the page.
What about conflict fatigue? What about someone adding too much conflict right away, but there's no real purpose? It's just creating friction because the writer thinks they need it, but then it doesn't really lend itself to the story. Do you see that a lot, or do you see not enough conflict?
I see not enough conflict more often as a problem. What you're describing of there being too much, it sounds to me like it would be the case of somebody who hadn't really figured out what the story is. And they just know Screenwriter 101, I'm supposed to have conflict, right? So they just have a bunch of conflict, but there's not necessarily a purpose. So it sounds like that might be a little situational or episodic. But I'd have to kind of see that on a case-by-case basis.